It seems there's been a mix-up, young man. We need you to move so that this seat can be reserved for our VIP guest, Jessica, the flight attendant said, her voice dripping with condescension despite her polite tone. This seat is typically reserved for special customers. I'm afraid you're not quite the right fit to be sitting here. Behind her, Karen Whitfield, a well-dressed white woman, stood impatiently, tapping her designer watch repeatedly. Her gaze was filled with scrutiny, flicking between Jordan Richardson, the young black student sitting in seat 2A, and the seat she clearly considered her personal territory. "I always sit here," Karen muttered, loud enough for those around to hear. "It's practically my seat." Jordan looked up, a fleeting hint of confusion crossing his calm face. He had done everything right. His father booked the ticket early, paid in full, and he arrived at the gate on time. Yet, somehow, his presence in this seat had become an issue that needed immediate resolution. Jordan Richardson, a 17-year-old black student, was sitting comfortably, watching his iPad. His casual shirt and black headphones made him look nothing like the typical first-class passenger. But for Jordan, that was perfectly normal. His father, Marcus Richardson, a famous CEO, had always taught him not to have to prove anything to anyone based on appearance or clothing. Just then, heavy, impatient footsteps echoed from the back of the cabin. A white woman with blonde hair tied up in an elegant bun, wearing a fashionable designer dress, approached Jordan's seat. She stopped, scanning Jordan from head to toe with a look of disdain. "Excuse me, are you in the wrong seat?" the woman asked, her voice high and cold. Jordan looked up, gently removing his headphones, and responded politely, "No, ma'am, this is my seat, 2A." The woman's face faltered, and she crossed her arms, now speaking with a more irritable and impatient tone. "I always sit in 2A on this flight. Are you sure you read your ticket correctly, or maybe they printed it wrong?" She glanced around as if looking for support. At that moment, head flight attendant Jessica walked over, her uniform fitting neatly, and her smile, once warm, quickly turned into a frown when she saw the scene. "What's going on here, Miss Whitfield?" Jessica asked, turning to Karen with a respectful tone, almost ignoring Jordan's presence. Karen Whitfield pointed at Jordan with an irritated glare. "He's in my seat, Jessica. 2A is my usual seat, you know that." Jessica turned to Jordan, her polite smile disappearing, replaced by a cold, skeptical expression. "Young man, I think you should check your ticket again. This is first class for VIP customers. I believe there's been some kind of mistake." Jordan frowned, feeling a bit uncomfortable, but still calmly took out his ticket and showed it to Jessica. The ticket clearly displayed seat 2A and Jordan Richardson's name. Yet Jessica showed no sign of satisfaction, staring at Jordan with suspicion. "Are you sure this ticket was purchased properly? First-class tickets are very expensive, usually." She paused, giving Jordan another once-over, then continued, her voice full of implication. "VIP customers don't usually look like they should be sitting here." A few nearby passengers began to turn their heads, curious about the unfolding situation. The awkwardness made Jordan feel even more uncomfortable, but he forced a polite smile. "My dad booked this ticket for me. I'm fully entitled to sit here." Karen let out a mocking laugh, then turned to Jessica with a shrug of helplessness. "Jessica, you know how important I am as a VIP customer. Am I really going to argue with a kid about a seat?" Jessica nodded, looking at Karen sympathetically, then coldly turned back to Jordan. "Look, I think you should move to another seat and stop bothering our loyal customer." Jordan felt a hot surge run through his neck. The unfairness and arrogance of these people deeply offended him. Yet, he took a deep breath, deciding to remain calm, and firmly replied, "I'm sorry, but this is my seat. If she has an issue, she can check the system herself." Jessica was momentarily taken aback by Jordan's determined attitude, but quickly regained her haughty expression, her eyes flashing with anger, as she realized Jordan wouldn't give in as she expected. Karen stood beside her, casting a disdainful glance around before leaning toward Jessica and whispering reproachfully, "If you can't handle this, I'll report it to your superiors." Jessica flinched, looking around nervously. In that moment, a few passengers had begun to take out their phones to record the escalating situation. Jessica turned to Jordan once more, her eyes colder and more resolute. "I'll ask you again, are you going to move, or do I need to call someone else to handle this?" Jordan looked directly into Jessica's eyes, a mix of sadness and disappointment rising within him. But there was no fear. His determined gaze made Jessica falter for a brief moment. The entire first-class cabin had fallen into a tense, suffocating silence, with the other passengers holding their breath, watching the unfolding drama. No one expected the expensive VIP flight of Skylux Airlines to start with such an unbelievable and dramatic confrontation. Jordan knew this struggle wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was a fight for respect and fairness, something that he and so many others like him deserved. And now, Jordan had decided to stand firm, unwilling to back down. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained thick with a suffocating silence. Jordan, with a calm and dignified expression, gently extended his ticket toward Jessica once more. In that moment, Jessica's eyes revealed a clear sense of unease as she looked at the name clearly printed on the ticket, Jordan Richardson. "Richardson?" Jessica frowned slightly, murmuring quietly enough so that no one else could hear, but loud enough for Jordan to catch the skepticism in her voice. The name clearly unsettled her, but instead of addressing the issue, Jessica quickly turned to Karen with a look of sympathy. At that moment, Karen, realizing things were not going as she had hoped, quietly moved closer to Jessica, her voice dropping to a whisper but still holding power. "Jessica, you know I'm a reasonable person. Handle this quickly, and I'll make sure you're not at a loss." With those words, Karen deftly took a neat stack of cash from her wallet and discreetly pressed it into Jessica's hand. The action was so swift that it seemed no one would notice, but Jordan's sharp eyes caught the moment of shame. Jordan felt a wave of heavy disappointment rise within him. He had heard his father talk about real-life stories of discrimination, but this was the first time he had witnessed it firsthand. And worse still, he was the victim. Jessica took the money, her expression shifting from unease to determination. She turned back to Jordan, leaning in slightly as if to exert more pressure, her voice cold. "I think you don't understand the situation. We could easily have you removed from the plane for causing a disturbance, and I'm sure you don't want that kind of trouble, do you?" Jordan took a deep breath, maintaining the calm his father had always taught him. He understood that this was not the time to lose control or get angry, because even the slightest misstep would put him right into the trap they had set. "Miss Jessica," Jordan looked her straight in the eye, his voice soft but firm, "I'm not causing any disturbance. I have a valid ticket, and I won't leave my seat just because someone thinks I don't deserve to be here." Jessica bit her lip, clearly taken aback by the calm confidence of the young student. She stepped back slightly, and just then a male voice called out from the front of the cabin, shattering the silence. "What's going on here, Jessica?" Trevor, the cabin supervisor, appeared, his sharp angular face serious, his eyes exuding authority. Trevor was well known in the airline for handling difficult situations quickly, but equally notorious for his dismissive attitude toward anyone not considered a VIP customer. Jessica quickly approached Trevor and whispered something to him. His eyes quickly scanned Jordan, his discomfort swiftly turning into disdain. Trevor walked up to Jordan's seat, standing very close, creating an atmosphere full of pressure and unease. "Listen, kid. I don't know who you think you are, but it's my responsibility to ensure that our most important customers are always satisfied. If you don't back down, I'll have to handle this in a way that neither of us will want." Jordan could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him. Some were secretly recording with their phones, others whispering in concern. But most of all, Jordan clearly saw the triumphant gaze of Karen Whitfield, watching him intently, as though she were certain she had won. However, instead of backing down, Jordan felt a fire of self-respect and justice burning brighter than ever. He understood that this was no longer about a first-class seat. It was about his own dignity, and the dignity of others like him who faced similar injustices. So, Jordan slowly stood up, not to leave, but to look Trevor straight in the eye with unwavering resolve. "I'm not leaving this seat. If you still think this is the right decision, go ahead and continue. I'm sure my father, Marcus Richardson, would be very interested in how you handle this situation." Trevor, upon hearing the name Marcus Richardson, was momentarily taken aback, a brief flash of surprise crossing his face. But quickly regaining his composure, Trevor responded with a hint of mockery and challenge in his voice. "Marcus Richardson? That name sounds familiar, but unfortunately, it won't help you now. Now, either you leave on your own, or we'll have to escort you out." Jordan stood firm, his gaze resolute, unshaken. Trevor's final words echoed through the first-class cabin like a declaration of war. A confrontation of power, honor, and justice had begun. The moment Trevor finished speaking, the air in the cabin seemed to freeze for a few brief seconds. Jordan stood firm, without the slightest wavering, his calm gaze directed straight at the man in front of him. He slowly spoke, each word clear and polite. "I'm sorry, but I will not give up my seat. I haven't done anything wrong to be treated like this." The determination in Jordan's voice made Trevor pause. His eyes revealed a mix of anger and a hint of confusion at the unexpected response from the young student. No passenger, especially not someone as young as Jordan, had ever flatly refused his request like this before. Nearby, Karen Whitfield began to show more impatience. She raised her hand to check her watch, then muttered under her breath, her face full of irritation, "Trevor, please hurry up. I have an important appointment right after this flight." Sensing the pressure from Karen, Trevor decided to take a more aggressive approach. He pulled a small radio from his suit pocket and coldly called out toward the cockpit. "Captain Reynolds, we have a serious issue in first class that needs your immediate attention." Less than 2 minutes later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Reynolds stepped out with a serious expression, his eyes scanning the passengers who were watching closely. As the head pilot, Reynolds was highly respected by Skylux Airlines, but also notorious for his rigid handling and tendency to prioritize wealthy customers above all else. Reynolds walked straight over to where Jordan and Trevor were standing. Trevor quickly summarized the situation in a few whispered words to him. After listening, Reynolds frowned slightly and immediately turned his stern gaze toward Jordan. Instead of listening to any explanation or looking at the evidence Jordan was holding, Reynolds simply nodded in agreement with Trevor and turned coldly to Jordan. "Young man, if you continue to refuse to cooperate, I will have to ask airport security to intervene. I can't allow anyone to cause a disruption on my flight." Jordan stood still for a moment, looking deeply into Captain Reynolds' eyes, hoping for some sense of fairness, but all he saw was a cold resolve, fully siding with Trevor and Karen. Jordan slowly spoke, trying to keep his composure. "Sir, I'm not causing a disturbance. I'm simply sitting in the seat that I've paid for. If you check—" "No need to check," Reynolds interrupted in a decisive tone. "You're delaying the flight. This is your last chance to leave your seat peacefully." Jordan fell silent, feeling a surge of disappointment and helplessness rise in his chest. But deep inside, he knew that giving in now would mean accepting injustice too easily. And he couldn't do that. "I'm sorry, but I will not leave my rightful seat," Jordan said gently but firmly. Reynolds, perhaps not expecting Jordan to challenge his authority, immediately pulled out his radio and signaled for airport security. "We have a disruptive passenger, requesting immediate security intervention." Just minutes later, 2 uniformed security officers boarded the plane. All eyes in the cabin were on Jordan. Passengers constantly raised their phones to record the unbelievable moment, while others whispered in disbelief and concern. One of the security officers spoke. "We need you to come with us off the plane right now." Jordan looked around the cabin one last time, his gaze meeting sympathetic looks, but also the cold, curious stares of those silently observing. Karen Whitfield stood a few steps away, her lips curling into a satisfied and triumphant smile, making Jordan feel like his heart was being crushed. He slowly gathered his belongings, stood up, and walked calmly, head held high. Jordan walked past Trevor, Jessica, Reynolds, and Karen without uttering a word of complaint, only offering a deep, proud look straight ahead. Outside the plane, at the boarding gate, hundreds of passengers in the waiting area had witnessed the entire scene. Many were filming, gossiping, and murmuring with surprise. Jordan descended the stairs with the security officers flanking him, feeling as though an invisible weight was pressing down on each step. Jordan knew this story wouldn't end here. But at that moment he couldn't have predicted that the injustice he had just faced would soon spark a massive wave, a wave powerful enough to change the fate of everyone involved. And he couldn't have known that, at that very moment, his father, Marcus Richardson, was beginning to receive notifications about the incident, his eyes serious as he watched the videos rapidly spreading across social media. A much bigger, fairer, and stronger battle had officially begun. At the moment when Jordan was escorted off the plane in front of hundreds of passengers, no one could have predicted that this moment would turn into a dramatic and uncontrollable turning point. But fate is strange, and sometimes the truth reveals itself most clearly in the most unexpected places. Sitting not far across from him, Emma Dawson, a 28-year-old freelance journalist specializing in social issues, observed the scene intently. Emma was known for her keen eye, always paying attention to unusual situations around her. Her sharp eyes had been on the situation since Karen Whitfield approached the young student with an air of superiority. Emma had long brown hair tied neatly, and her deep green eyes always carried a sense of determination. She was the kind of person who could never accept injustice happening before her eyes without taking action. From the moment Jessica started pressuring Jordan to leave his seat, Emma carefully and discreetly began recording the entire sequence of events on her phone. The phone was held at the perfect angle, capturing every gesture and expression of the people involved. When Karen subtly slipped money into Jessica's hand, the act lasted only a few seconds, but was captured perfectly on camera. Emma also recorded Trevor's threatening attitude toward Jordan, as well as Captain Reynolds' indifference and injustice. Emma felt her heartbeat quicken as she held her phone. As someone who had written extensively about discrimination, she had never witnessed such a blatant and symbolic event like this before. This wasn't a vague argument. It was the stark and painful truth unfolding right before her. Emma waited until Jordan stepped down the stairs and was out of sight before stopping the recording. Her hands were slightly trembling from the emotions of anger and frustration. She knew that in her hands was not just a video, but a powerful weapon that could spark significant change. It didn't take long before Emma quickly opened her laptop. She spent a few minutes trimming and editing the video, keeping all the most crucial moments intact. The headline she wrote was short but powerful. Black student kicked out of VIP section, just because a white woman bribed. Emma hesitated for a moment before clicking the upload button on social media. She fully understood the immense power of moments like this. Within minutes, the video would be beyond her control. But deep down, she knew what needed to be done. This was her duty as a journalist, as a media professional, and above all, as a human being who could not stand by and watch such blatant injustice unfold. Emma hit the post button, and from that moment, the wheels of destiny began turning faster than ever. In less than 20 minutes, Emma's video had garnered over 100,000 views, thousands of shares, and emotional comments began flooding in like a torrent. Some couldn't believe their eyes. Others expressed their outrage at the blatant and disrespectful behavior of Skylux Airlines. An account with millions of followers immediately shared the video, accompanied by an angry comment. "I can't believe this is still happening in 2024. A kid is treated like a criminal just because of his skin color and clothes. Skylux Airlines, you owe this boy a public apology." That was all it took for the video to go viral on social media. In less than 2 hours, it had reached millions of views. The news was immediately picked up by major newspapers, TV stations, and popular media outlets. A flood of angry comments continued to pour in, and the hashtag number Justice for Jordan quickly rose to the top of trending topics. Skylux Airlines, once a beloved luxury airline, was now suddenly a symbol of racism and corruption. Emma sat quietly in a small airport cafe, silently watching the rapid spread of the video. Messages from friends and colleagues kept coming to her phone, asking for details and the source of the incident. But right now, Emma's mind was solely focused on Jordan, the young student who had maintained his composure and dignity throughout the unfair treatment on the plane. She knew she had done the right thing. And now, the only thing she hoped for was that justice would be fully served. Emma felt proud that she hadn't chosen to remain silent. Thousands of miles away, Marcus Richardson, Jordan's father, was in a meeting with the board of directors of his company. His phone kept buzzing with messages from close associates. Marcus picked up his phone and read a few brief lines, and his heart sank when he saw his son's name, Jordan, mentioned in numerous messages and posts. Marcus quickly opened the link that had been sent to him, his face going from anxious to serious, then filled with rage. He watched the entire video, which was more than 5 minutes long. When the moment came where Karen secretly handed money to Jessica, he gritted his teeth, his cold eyes flashing with intense anger. As the video ended, Marcus Richardson stood up, gestured to end the meeting, and said only one sentence to his associates before leaving the room. "I need to deal with this immediately." He knew a big battle awaited him, a battle for justice, not just for his son, but for all those facing injustice in the world. At the same time, Marcus Richardson stood up, leaving the emergency meeting to handle his son's situation. The atmosphere at Skylux Airlines headquarters was filled with tension. CEO Richard Williams sat silently in his executive office, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, where the controversial video of the scandal was being repeatedly aired on major news outlets. Richard Williams was a powerful man, accustomed to the storms of business. At 55, he still maintained a fit physique, with a sharp, angular face and piercing eyes that often made business partners wary. But this time, All of his usual confidence seemed to vanish. He turned pale when one of his senior assistants entered the room, trembling as he delivered the urgent news. "Sir, the boy who was kicked off the plane is the only son of Marcus Richardson, the CEO of Right Tech Solutions. Marcus is our largest investor, holding crucial shares, and has the power to decide the fate of our airline." The moment these words were spoken, it felt as though the room became freezing cold. Richard Williams shot up from his chair, his palms suddenly drenched in cold sweat, a rare reaction for a man who had weathered many major crises before. "Say that again?" Williams gritted his teeth, barely able to believe his own ears. The assistant shakily repeated, "Jordan Richardson is Marcus Richardson's son, our largest strategic investor. Major news outlets have confirmed it, and the story is spreading out of control, sir." Williams felt an intense headache come on. No one understood better than him the enormous power and influence Marcus Richardson held, the man who had saved Skylux Airlines from the brink of bankruptcy 2 years ago with a massive investment, accompanied by vital strategic contracts. Marcus was also notorious for his zero-tolerance stance on any misconduct or racism. Richard Williams immediately called an emergency meeting with the airline's senior leadership. Less than 30 minutes later, the top executives of Skylux Airlines were seated around the large conference table, all wearing anxious and tense expressions. At the far end of the room, a large screen displayed Skylux Airlines stock prices, which had been continuously plummeting in red. In less than an hour, Skylux's stock had lost millions of dollars in value, causing everyone to sit up straighter as if pricked by 1,000 needles. "This is a disaster," Chief Financial Officer David Anderson spoke up, his voice trembling but clear, trying to maintain composure. "We need an official statement immediately to mitigate the damage. Every second that passes, we're losing millions of dollars." Richard Williams glanced around the room, his eyes filled with anger and disappointment. How did this happen? His voice was like cold steel, heavy and harsh. How could we let a student be treated like this, especially when he's the son of the person on whom we rely entirely? The room fell silent. After a moment, a hesitant voice spoke up. It was Lisa Morgan, the head of customer service, known for her desire to please VIP customers. "Sir, I'm afraid this is not the first time something like this has happened. It's just that this time it's been clearly recorded on video and is highly embarrassing, and the boy happens to be the son of someone extremely powerful. Are you implying that we've tolerated this kind of behavior for too long?" Richard Williams snapped, his eyes locking onto Lisa with reproach. Lisa fell silent, her gaze dropping in embarrassment. She understood the implication behind Williams' words. Richard Williams took a deep breath, trying to calm himself before decisively addressing the room. "We will issue an official public apology immediately. I also want those involved, Jessica, Trevor, and Captain Reynolds, to be held accountable. Suspend them immediately and conduct a thorough internal investigation. We need to act fast to prove that Skylux Airlines does not tolerate racism or corruption." He paused for a second and then continued, his tone even more serious. "But I fear that won't be enough. We need to reach out directly to Marcus Richardson to resolve this issue at its root. I'll personally call him and meet with him." Everyone in the room nodded in agreement. However, they all understood that this was a call that wouldn't be easy. Marcus Richardson was not the type of person to overlook serious mistakes, especially when they involved his only son. Richard Williams returned to his private office right after the meeting. Sitting in front of the phone, he stared at the name Marcus Richardson flashing on his personal phone screen. This brief moment seemed to stretch on forever. He knew very well. That one call could determine the future of Skylux Airlines. One wrong word, one insincere tone, and the entire luxurious airline empire he and his colleagues had built over decades could come crashing down. Richard Williams picked up the phone, took a deep breath, and dialed Marcus Richardson's number. He knew what he had to do, but what he couldn't predict was how Marcus would react to this incredibly serious incident. The moment Richard Williams made the call was the same moment Marcus Richardson was about to step onto the podium at the Right Tech Solutions Conference Center. A hall packed with journalists and prestigious media outlets eagerly waiting for his every word. Marcus glanced briefly at his phone, seeing the caller's name on the screen. Richard Williams, Skylux Airlines. A brief moment of consideration flashed across his eyes, and then Marcus decided to decline the call, placing the phone back into his suit pocket with cold resolve. Marcus walked forward with determination, his footsteps echoing firmly on the hard wooden floor, his steely gaze fixed ahead towards the audience. The man, known as a powerful CEO, but also one of great integrity, now stood before the largest public event of his career. He adjusted his tie gently, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd, before beginning his speech in a calm but firm tone. I stand here today not only as the CEO of Right Tech Solutions, but first and foremost as a father. What I am about to say is not easy, but it must be said, because this is not just my story or my son Jordan's. This is a story about the dignity and fairness of all of us. Marcus paused for a moment, the room almost completely silent, waiting for each word to come from the man at the center of attention. He continued, his voice becoming even more resolute. My son, Jordan Richardson, 17 years old, has just endured a humiliating experience, all because of the color of his skin and the selfishness of some individuals at Skylux Airlines. A young child removed from his rightful seat in front of hundreds of witnesses, and I watched the video capturing that blatant corruption and racism with my own eyes. He paused again, his gaze locking onto the cameras aimed at him, sending a message loud and clear. I once trusted Skylux Airlines, invested heavily in this company believing they were deserving of their reputation and trust. But after what has happened, I can no longer, and will never again, associate with an organization that disregards human ethics and dignity. Marcus Richardson looked around the room one more time, then declared decisively, Today, I officially announce that Right Tech Solutions will terminate our $50 million strategic partnership with Skylux Airlines. Not only that, but we will also withdraw all our investments and shares in this airline. Right Tech will never tolerate such acts of racism and injustice. These strong words struck Skylux Airlines like a thunderbolt. Instantly, news of Marcus's decision spread like wildfire, covering major news outlets from the U.S. to Europe and from Asia to Australia. The stock market reacted immediately, with Skylux Airlines stock plummeting uncontrollably. At Skylux Airlines headquarters, Richard Williams stood frozen as he heard Marcus's public statement on the media. His attempts to reach him were now completely futile. Calls from the press, investors, and shareholders flooded in, turning his office into a chaos of panic. Other investors, seeing Marcus Richardson's decision, immediately began pulling their funds from Skylux Airlines. They understood that losing Right Tech Solutions' backing meant Skylux lost a crucial financial and strategic pillar. Skylux's stock fell dramatically within just a few hours, its market capitalization wiped out by hundreds of millions of dollars. Richard Williams called an emergency meeting for the second time in less than 24 hours. The faces of the executives were now filled with fear and disarray, no one daring to speak. Williams felt as if he was falling into a deep abyss, unable to find a way out. Finally, his voice rang out, tired and helpless. "We are witnessing the most severe collapse in the history of this company. If we don't act fast, Skylux Airlines will not survive this crisis." "What should we do?" David Anderson spoke up, his voice filled with concern. "Is there any way we can convince Marcus Richardson to change his decision?" Richard Williams shook his head slowly, feeling the weight of age and pressure on his shoulders. "I'm afraid it's too late. Marcus Richardson is not one to speak lightly. His public statements have sealed the door to reconciliation." He took a deep breath, then continued with a bitter tone. "Now, the only thing we can do is immediately carry out a complete restructuring, put forward a clear plan for accountability and transparency, along with our sincerest apology to the Richardson family and the public. Only then can we hope to salvage some of the remaining reputation and trust." But deep down, Richard Williams knew that the future of Skylux Airlines was now extremely fragile. A company once synonymous with luxury and prestige was now on the verge of bankruptcy, all because of the selfishness and irresponsibility of a few individuals. Marcus Richardson, from his office, could clearly see Skylux Airlines' situation growing more and more dire. But at that moment, he felt no satisfaction or joy. He only felt a heavy disappointment toward a company he had once trusted deeply. But more than anything, Marcus knew this wasn't just his fight. This was a wake-up call to society about the cost of silently accepting injustice and discrimination. And Marcus had decided he would fight to the end, not just for his son, but for all those who had been unfairly treated but lacked the strength to speak up. As Skylux Airlines sank deeper into chaos and despair under the financial pressure from the mass withdrawal of investors, CEO Richard Williams knew that the company had to take bold and decisive actions to regain some of the lost public trust. Now, all eyes were on how Skylux would handle the individuals directly responsible for this scandal. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight hit the Skylux headquarters, Jessica, Trevor, and Captain Reynolds received urgent summons to the company's main conference room. All three had a bad feeling, but none of them expected things to have escalated this much. Jessica entered the conference room first, her face clearly showing signs of tension and anxiety. Gone was the confident, smiling flight attendant from before. Today, Jessica looked lost, her eyes hollow from lack of sleep. Trevor and Captain Reynolds walked in right behind her, both trying to maintain calm expressions but unable to hide the nervousness and unease in their eyes. Richard Williams sat at the head of the table, surrounded by high-level executives with stern, cold faces. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, and no one spoke for a few minutes. Finally, Williams stood, his sharp gaze locking onto the three employees waiting for their fate. "Jessica, Trevor, Captain Reynolds." Williams' voice was low but powerful. "I think you all know very well why we're sitting here today. Your wrongful actions have thrown Skylux Airlines into the biggest crisis in the company's history." Jessica was about to speak up in her defense, but Williams immediately raised his hand to stop her. "Miss Jessica, we have thoroughly reviewed all the evidence from the videos capturing the entire incident. Your accepting a bribe to discriminate against an innocent passenger has crossed all ethical and professional boundaries." Jessica's eyes filled with despair as she heard those words. She lowered her head, tears streaming down her face, unable to say anything in her defense. Williams turned to Trevor, his voice growing colder and more resolute. "Trevor, you didn't just assist in this wrongdoing. You directly threatened and insulted a passenger. Your defiant attitude and arrogance escalated this situation beyond control." Trevor clenched his fists, his jaw tightening in powerless anger, but he knew that any attempt to resist would only make things worse. Finally, Williams looked at Captain Reynolds, his tone now tinged with disappointment. "Captain Reynolds, I have always trusted your judgment and your years of experience. But you chose to side with wrongdoing, abusing your power to suppress a passenger instead of protecting justice and safety on the flight. This is a grave failure in the responsibility of a chief pilot." Reynolds remained silent, his face aging a few years in that moment. He had never felt so humiliated in all his 3 decades of flying. Williams took a deep breath and made his final declaration. "Therefore, the Board of Directors has decided to terminate all 3 of your contracts, effective immediately. I want this decision to be announced to all Skylux Airlines employees as a clear statement that our company will not tolerate any form of discrimination or corruption. Security will assist you in leaving the premises immediately after this meeting." The 3 employees bowed their heads and left, the cold stares of their colleagues following them. The moment they stepped out of that door, they all realized their careers and reputations were officially over. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Karen Whitfield was enjoying a leisurely morning in her luxurious apartment. She hadn't even finished her morning coffee when her phone started vibrating with an endless stream of messages and emails from her company. As she opened and read them, Karen's face slowly transformed from confusion to shock. An official email from HR informed her that she had been suspended indefinitely pending an investigation into her involvement in racial discrimination and bribery, directly related to the Skylux Airlines incident that had caused a public uproar. Before she could even calm down, her phone buzzed again. A different email from Skylux Airlines Customer Service Department, notifying her that the airline had permanently banned her from using its services. From a VIP customer, Karen was now one of the least welcome people on Skylux flights. Karen felt as though her entire world had collapsed in an instant. She slumped down onto her sofa, her hands covering her face, finally realizing that her arrogance and selfishness had cost her dearly. At Skylux Airlines headquarters, Richard Williams sat alone in his office after making those difficult decisions. He stared out the window, his mind filled with anxiety, but he understood that these actions were necessary for the company to survive the media storm. However, deep down, Williams knew that the harsh punishment for these individuals was just the beginning. Skylux Airlines still had a long way to go in restoring its reputation and the trust it had lost. Elsewhere in the city, Marcus Richardson quietly watched the entire unfolding drama from afar. He didn't take pleasure in seeing others pay the price, but he was satisfied that justice was being served, step by step. But Marcus also understood that the battle wasn't over yet. True justice would only be achieved when the entire system that caused such injustices was changed at its roots, and he decided that he would continue to fight until no one else had to suffer the same injustices his son had just endured. When the severe firing decisions were announced by Skylux Airlines, Marcus Richardson had yet to make any further statements. While Skylux's leadership anxiously hoped that Marcus's anger would subside after their recent actions, they were unexpectedly met with an official letter from his office by the end of the day. Richard Williams opened the letter with a heavy heart, his chest sinking as he read the polite yet firm language of Marcus's words. The letter demanded that Skylux Airlines immediately suspend all flight operations for 48 hours in order to carry out mandatory anti-bias and anti-racism training for all employees, from senior management to ground staff, flight attendants, and pilots. After reading the letter, Williams was almost stunned. Halting all flights for 2 days was not only a shock to the airline's reputation, but also an immense financial loss, estimated to run into the millions of dollars. He glanced around at the senior executives sitting quietly around the meeting table, their faces full of helplessness and concern. Williams knew they had no choice but to comply with Marcus's difficult demand. "Everyone," Williams spoke, his voice heavy, as if weighed down by invisible pressure. "We cannot oppose this request. This is no longer a negotiation. It's a clear order from Marcus Richardson. If we refuse, Skylux Airlines will undoubtedly face complete collapse. We have no way out." The people in the room exchanged silent glances, their faces reflecting disappointment and sorrow at the harsh reality. Finally, David Anderson, the CFO, spoke up reluctantly, but understanding that this was the only thing that could be done. "I agree with you. We have no choice but to accept it. Though this will cause colossal losses, it may be the only way for Skylux Airlines to have a chance at recovery." The others nodded silently. Williams let out a long, heavy sigh before ending the meeting with a voice full of resignation. "Announce immediately the suspension of all flights. We will take full responsibility to the public, our passengers, and all relevant partners. Prepare yourselves for the upcoming media storm." As soon as the announcement was made that Skylux Airlines would suspend all operations for 48 hours to conduct mandatory anti-bias and anti-racism training, the public reaction exploded in fury. The media and major news channels continuously reported and analyzed the losses the airline would face. Airports, large and small, were thrown into chaos as thousands of passengers suddenly lost their flights and scrambled to rearrange their schedules. Complaints, emails demanding compensation, and passenger anger flooded Skylux Airlines' customer service office. However, the company's leadership knew that there was no choice but to endure this storm if they wanted to preserve any hope for the future. At the same time, Marcus Richardson publicly spoke out on major media platforms, explaining that the decision to demand Skylux Airlines suspend operations was necessary to bring about real change from within the company, ensuring that no passenger in the future would ever have to endure the injustices that his son just experienced. Marcus's statement received widespread support from the public, human rights organizations, and the online community. He clarified that his goal was not to destroy Skylux Airlines, but to help them recognize a long-standing issue within their company, an issue that had allowed injustices to occur. Marcus also sent a clear message to society as a whole. "We cannot accept any form of racism or bias anywhere. Only when each individual and organization truly understands their responsibility can this society truly change." At Skylux Airlines, the 2-day suspension of operations became the longest and heaviest days in the company's history. All employees, from pilots to flight attendants, from ground service staff to senior executives, participated in intense training sessions, directly supervised and implemented by experts from Right Tech Solutions, Marcus's company. The training program was not easy. Employees were confronted with real stories about the consequences of bias, and they carefully analyzed situations of discrimination, including the incident involving Jordan Richardson on the previous flight. Many of them realized for the first time how their silence and indifference had contributed to these unjust actions. Richard Williams, though the CEO, also participated fully in the training sessions. He sat quietly, listening to each story, each lesson, and for the first time in his long career, Williams truly understood the profound, invisible harm that discrimination causes to individuals. At the end of the 48-hour training, Skylux Airlines officially resumed operations with a public commitment before the media and the public. The airline would never allow such incidents to occur again and would closely monitor and strictly handle any signs of discrimination in the future. However, despite resuming operations, Skylux Airlines knew full well that they were facing a bitter reality. The financial, reputational, and trust losses from this incident would take significant time and effort to recover from. Marcus Richardson, from a distance, quietly watched it all. He was not pleased by the damage Skylux Airlines had to endure, but he believed that sometimes people needed to experience significant losses to truly learn lessons about respect and fairness, and for him, this struggle had only just begun. The 2 days of suspension at Skylux Airlines had finally passed, but the echoes of those events still reverberated through every hallway, every office, and within the minds of each employee at the airline. As the anti-bias training program neared its conclusion, all Skylux employees received notice of a special session in the company's main hall, a direct talk with Jordan Richardson, the young student who had become the center of a global media storm. The atmosphere in the hall that morning was tense and filled with curiosity. Staff from different departments filled the room, many still feeling a sense of confusion and unease about facing the person at the heart of the recent controversy. Among the crowd, both Richard Williams and the senior leadership team had arrived early. Their eyes were thoughtful, waiting for some kind of awakening from the very person the company had previously caused such deep harm to. At around 9 a.m., the doors to the hall slowly opened, and Jordan Richardson stepped in, greeted by a profound silence from everyone present. He wore a simple white shirt and jeans, his posture upright, his face exuding calm confidence but without a trace of arrogance. Jordan walked up to the podium, his gaze scanning the hall, offering a slight nod as a greeting. "Good morning, everyone," Jordan began, his voice clear but polite. "I'm sure you all know who I am and why I'm here today." Jordan paused for a moment, a subtle sadness mixed with determination in his eyes, then continued. "Before this, I never imagined I'd be standing in front of such a large crowd to share the painful experience I went through. An experience I hope no one else ever has to endure again." He began recounting the details of that fateful flight, his voice calm yet filled with genuine emotion. He described the shame and helplessness of being looked down upon by Jessica, the disdainful stare from Trevor as he tried to force Jordan out of his seat, and, most of all, the cold, indifferent attitude of Captain Reynolds when he chose to side with injustice. The small yet piercing details, now told from Jordan's perspective, filled the room with a suffocating silence. Jordan paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if holding back the overwhelming emotions inside. When he spoke again, his voice grew deeper. "But what hurt me the most wasn't being forced to leave the plane in front of hundreds of people, embarrassed and humiliated. What truly broke my heart was realizing, in that moment, that people like me, young, black people, are still looked down upon, still seen as unworthy, even when they've done nothing wrong. That's what really hurt me the most." The hall was completely silent. Some had lowered their heads, others quickly wiping away tears. Many employees who had previously seen the incident as a mere media blunder now truly understood the pain and harm caused by the injustice to a person. Jordan continued with even more conviction. "I'm not here to blame or condemn any of you. I'm here to remind us all that even the smallest actions, the slightest dismissive glance or an offhand comment can cause significant harm. I hope that from today forward, we all take a moment to reflect on ourselves, so that we never repeat the same mistakes." In the front row, Richard Williams listened intently, his face full of complex emotions. Every word Jordan spoke felt like a sharp needle piercing his soul, forcing him to confront the shortcomings in his leadership and the way his company had been managed for so long. Jordan looked around the room once more, then gently spoke his final words. "My dad always taught me that the most important thing isn't the mistakes we make, but how we face them and make amends. I believe Skylux Airlines can do that. Not for profit, not for reputation, but simply because it is the right thing to do. Thank you all for listening to me today." Jordan bowed his head slightly and left the podium, the applause starting softly at first, but gradually growing louder and more powerful. The applause stretched on, showing the deep respect everyone in the room had for this young student. Richard Williams watched Jordan walk away, and a strange feeling of admiration stirred in his heart. For the first time in his life, the powerful CEO understood something crucial. No amount of money, no business success could ever compensate for the emotional harm his company had caused to people like Jordan. Turning to his colleagues, his gaze was serious but resolute. "Today's talk was, truly, the most important lesson of my career. I think it's time for us to make real, fundamental changes, so that no one ever has to go through what that young man just described. I hope you all feel the same." Everyone else nodded in agreement. Jordan's honest and profound sharing not only helped Skylux Airlines realize the deep issues within the company, but also ignited a powerful sense of responsibility and determination to change within each individual in that room. As Jordan walked out of the hall, he felt much lighter. He knew that, although it was just a brief sharing session, it had created a powerful force that helped many awaken and become ready to act for change. And he believed that this was only the first step in a much longer journey ahead. A journey toward fairness and respect that he had always believed in. As Jordan walked out of the hall with a sense of relief after sharing his story, in another corner of the city, Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds were slowly beginning to feel the severe consequences of their wrong decisions. That morning, Trevor woke up with the same heavy, empty feeling that had lingered for weeks. His apartment, once full of amenities and bathed in light, now felt dark and cluttered, mirroring the gloomy mood of its owner. Trevor had lost everything in an instant: his job, his honor, and his self-respect. For more than a month, Trevor had been sending out job applications to dozens of different airlines, from large corporations to smaller companies, hoping to at least find a lower-level position to sustain his life. But the responses he received were only cold silence or polite yet firm rejections. "We're sorry. We can't hire you at this time. Your application doesn't meet our company's criteria." Trevor wasn't a fool. He knew the scandal had stamped his name with an indelible stain. The airline industry was small and highly competitive. A single scandal was enough to destroy a career built over more than 10 years. On Trevor's desk, unpaid bills piled up as a harsh reminder that his life was slipping into crisis. He sat down in his chair, resting his head in his hands, wondering where he had gone wrong. But deep down, Trevor knew better than anyone that his arrogance and disdain for others were the things that had ruined his future. Meanwhile, in a much smaller apartment than Trevor's, Jessica sat quietly in front of her computer screen, silently reading the latest rejection email. The tears had long since dried, and now there was only a weary sense of disappointment. Jessica had once been a top flight attendant at Skylux, proud of her ability to attract the attention of wealthy and powerful passengers. But now, all she received was distance and suspicious glances from everyone around her. Even her once close colleagues no longer responded to her messages or calls. Every time she showed up for a job interview, Jessica could clearly feel the judgment and wariness from the recruiters. One airline manager had bluntly told her, "Jessica, we can't hire you at this time. Reputation is the most important thing in our industry, and unfortunately you don't meet that standard right now." Those blunt words felt like a sharp knife, leaving Jessica more desperate than ever. She began to understand that her silent complicity when witnessing the injustice toward Jordan was the greatest mistake of her life, a mistake for which she was now paying with both her career and her future. As for Captain Reynolds, the veteran pilot with over 30 years of experience, things weren't any better. Reynolds had once believed that his authority and years of experience would protect him from personal mistakes. But now, he had to face the bitter truth. A lifetime devoted to the skies had evaporated in an instant because of an unethical decision. Reynolds could no longer apply to any other airline. No one in the industry wanted to hire a pilot directly involved in the discrimination scandal that was shaking the global public. He sat in the living room, looking at old photos of himself in the cockpit, the sense of regret and shame weighing heavily on his heart. Elsewhere, Karen Whitfield, the woman who once thought that money and power could buy everything, was now experiencing a feeling she had never known before in her life, the feeling of being shunned. Since the scandal broke, Karen had started to notice that the social friends who had always surrounded her for personal gain were now avoiding her, coming up with all sorts of excuses not to meet or contact her. The company where she worked quickly suspended her indefinitely and ordered her not to appear at the office or any company-related events to avoid tarnishing the corporation's reputation. Karen had been accustomed to a life always in the spotlight, used to being respected and pampered. But now, every time she stepped outside, she could clearly feel the scrutinizing, disdainful gazes from those around her. From being admired and respected, Karen suddenly became a negative symbol of selfishness and discrimination. She sat in the silent living room, her lifeless eyes staring out the window. The texts and calls that once flooded in now had completely stopped, as if the world had forgotten her existence. For the first time in her life, Karen truly understood the feeling of loneliness and despair when society turned its back on her, realizing that money and status could not buy trust and genuine respect from people. While those who had caused harm to Jordan were paying the price with their careers and lives, at the office of Right Tech Solutions, Marcus Richardson quietly observed all these developments from afar. He did not feel joy at their failure, but he knew this was necessary, a harsh yet vital lesson for them to truly wake up and understand the consequences of their actions. Marcus gently closed his computer screen, his mind filled with thoughts. He knew his battle was far from over, and changing the mindset of an entire system was no easy task. But he also firmly believed in one thing. The first step had been taken, and the journey would continue until fairness and respect were restored to their rightful place. While Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds struggled with the isolation of their days, facing the direct consequences of their wrong decisions, Marcus Richardson had been quietly observing and reflecting deeply on how to deal with those who had caused immense harm to his son. Marcus understood that punishing those who caused injustice was necessary, but he also recognized clearly, to truly change the root of racism and bias, mere punishment wasn't enough. Real change could only occur when individuals truly understood the consequences of their actions and were given the opportunity to correct their wrongs. It was from this deep understanding that Marcus decided to establish a special program called Second Chance, a humanitarian project aimed at giving individuals who had made severe mistakes due to bias and discrimination an opportunity to reform, learn, and fundamentally change their mindset. The news of Marcus Richardson establishing the Second Chance program quickly spread through the media, attracting widespread public interest. Even those who had once harshly condemned the actions of Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds were surprised and moved by Marcus's humanitarian gesture. When Trevor received the notification that he could participate in this special program, he was initially hesitant. His wounded pride and overwhelming guilt made him feel unworthy of any forgiveness. But in the end, he decided to join. The realization that this could be his last chance to reclaim his true self made him take the leap. On the first day in the classroom of the Second Chance program, Trevor felt as if he were entering a completely foreign world. The classroom was simple, with participants from various backgrounds, but they all shared one common trait. They had all made severe mistakes due to bias. In those initial moments, Trevor remained silent and withdrawn, avoiding the gazes of the others. In a corner of the room, Jessica sat quietly with a similar look of anxiety. Jessica had never imagined that she would end up in this situation. She had once been confident and proud, but now that pride had been crushed, leaving a void in her heart that only regret could fill. But Jessica knew she had to face reality, to learn how to look at her mistakes directly if she were ever going to change. Then there was Captain Reynolds, the oldest man in the class, who was also present. He was quiet and reserved, but his eyes carried a deep sense of regret. Reynolds had once been a respected and admired pilot, but now he knew that respect could only exist if he truly acknowledged his mistakes and accepted change. The training program of Second Chance wasn't filled with dry lectures or theory. Instead, it consisted of candid discussions where participants were forced to confront the very mistakes they had made. During one crucial class, Marcus Richardson himself attended and spoke directly to the participants. The atmosphere in the room was tense as he walked in, but Marcus simply smiled gently, breaking the tension with his calm and sincere voice. "You are all here today because you made mistakes. But I believe that we all can make mistakes. What matters most is not the mistakes that have been made, but how we face and overcome them." Marcus continued, his gaze stern yet filled with compassion as he looked directly at Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds. "I created this program not for you to forget your wrongs. On the contrary, I want you to remember them deeply, so that you never repeat them again." Marcus's words struck Trevor like a sharp pain in his chest, but at the same time, it was a strangely relieving feeling. For the first time since the incident, he realized that he wasn't just being punished, he was being given a real opportunity, an opportunity to become a better person. Jessica quietly wiped away her tears. In the past few days, she had constantly tortured herself for her silent complicity. But today, when Marcus spoke of forgiveness and change, she realized that true change begins with facing her own mistakes. Captain Reynolds sat at the back of the room, still silent, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly understood. Reynolds had once believed that someone like him couldn't make mistakes, but it was his overconfidence that had caused him to lose sight of the most important values he had once pursued. Now, he knew that the only way to fix those mistakes was to accept change from within himself. The Second Chance program continued for several weeks. Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds gradually learned to reflect on their behaviors, gaining a deeper understanding of the harm that bias and discrimination had caused to others, especially Jordan, the boy who had directly suffered the consequences of their actions. By the end of the program, all three had a clear understanding of the severe mistakes they had made. But more importantly, they all understood that they had been given a special chance to correct, change, and start anew. Marcus Richardson watched the entire process with patience and deep compassion. He knew that changing the deep-seated prejudices in people's minds was incredibly difficult, but he also believed that true fairness and respect could only be built when each individual truly understood and accepted the need to correct their wrongs. And he understood that, although the journey was long, the most important step had already been taken. That was giving those who had made mistakes a real chance to change and return to the true values of being a human being. The Second Chance program became a turning point in the lives of Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds. After their difficult early days confronting their past mistakes, the three of them now understood clearly that the only way to regain trust and respect was to bravely face the truth, no matter how bitter and painful it might be. During that special group meeting, Trevor was the first to stand up and share his personal story. He took a deep breath, looked directly into the eyes of his classmates, and began speaking, his voice gentle but full of sincere emotion. I grew up in a family where bias and prejudice were so normal that I never questioned them. My father always told me that everyone has their place in society, and we should keep a certain distance from those not on the same level as us. I grew up believing that as a truth, never thinking to question whether it was right or wrong. Trevor paused, swallowing as if trying to hold back the overwhelming emotions inside him, then continued. The day the incident with Jordan happened, I acted exactly as my father had taught me, looking down on and suppressing a boy just because I believed he didn't deserve respect. But from that moment on, my life turned upside down. I lost everything I had once valued, my job, my reputation, my career. But the most painful realization was that what I had truly lost was the kindness and humanity I should have always had. At that moment, Trevor's eyes were full of regret, but there was also a glimmer of sincere hope. Today, I stand here not to ask for easy forgiveness, but to affirm that I have recognized my mistake, and I promise that from now on I will never let those outdated prejudices control my life again. I will spend the rest of my life making amends for my wrongs and proving that I have truly changed. Trevor's heartfelt words left the class in profound silence. Others began to stand up and share their own stories. Jessica sat quietly in a corner of the room, her heart pounding as it was her turn. She stood up, her voice gentle at first but gradually growing firmer as she admitted the hardest truth she had long avoided. When Jordan was unfairly treated on that flight, I chose to stay silent. At that time, I thought it wasn't my place, that speaking up would cause me trouble. But I was wrong. My silence wasn't harmless. It was the most dangerous complicity to that unjust behavior. Jessica looked directly at Marcus Richardson, who was still listening attentively with eyes full of empathy, and then continued with determination. Now, I understand that staying silent in the face of injustice is no different than directly causing it. I have lost so much to learn this lesson, but I promise that from now on, no matter where I am, I will never choose silence again. I will always speak out to defend those who are treated unfairly, no matter how difficult it may make things for me. Jessica's sincere and resolute words touched the hearts of everyone present. It was clear to all that her public admission of guilt and her commitment to change was not easy, but this only further proved that Jessica was truly walking the path of transformation. In the corner of the room, Captain Reynolds sat silently, listening to Trevor and Jessica's stories with a thoughtful expression. When it was his turn to speak, he slowly stood up, his face showing a mix of shame and deep regret. I've spent my whole life climbing the power ladder in the aviation industry. I've always been proud of my position as chief pilot, of the authority and respect that position brought. But it was that power and status that caused me to lose the most important thing: my integrity and compassion. Reynolds took a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion as he continued. That day, when faced with the decision to protect an innocent boy or to protect the interests of the wealthy, I made the wrong choice. I chose power, rank, and my own safety over doing what was right. That was the biggest mistake of my life. He looked directly into Marcus Richardson's eyes, speaking with the utmost sincerity. I am truly sorry to you and Jordan from the bottom of my heart. I cannot change the past, but I promise I will dedicate the rest of my life to doing whatever I can to make amends. I will do everything in my power to educate young people in the aviation industry about the importance of ethics and responsibility, so that no one else has to make the same grave mistake that I did. Reynolds' words ended in a deep silence that resonated throughout the room. Marcus Richardson gave a gentle nod, his eyes full of understanding and empathy. He stood up and walked toward the three of them, his voice firm and resolute. "I greatly appreciate your courage and sincerity. I believe that directly facing your mistakes is the most important step toward real change. The road ahead will still be long and full of challenges, but I believe that all of us can overcome it if we are brave and sincere." The group meeting ended in deep emotion. Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds walked out of the classroom feeling much lighter. They understood that this was only the first step on the challenging journey of making amends ahead. But now, they no longer felt afraid, because they knew they were no longer alone on the path to reclaiming their true worth. After the difficult and challenging months in the Second Chance program, Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds began to slowly find themselves again, while Skylux Airlines, the airline that had once been on the brink of bankruptcy due to a discrimination scandal, was now entering a completely new phase. A spectacular rebirth. 6 months had passed since the shocking incident, and the atmosphere at Skylux Airlines headquarters had completely transformed. The offices, hallways, and airport check-in counters were filled with a spirit of renewal, alongside the dedicated and open attitude of all the staff. Longtime customers of the airline could clearly see the difference. They were greeted with genuine smiles. There was no longer any distinction between VIP and regular passengers, and most importantly, every passenger felt they were being treated equally and fairly. This change did not come by chance. Immediately after the scandal, CEO Richard Williams and the airline's leadership implemented a thorough reform. Skylux Airlines invested millions of dollars in anti-bias training programs, completely overhauled their recruitment processes, and applied strict standards of ethics and transparency at all management and operational levels. This led Skylux Airlines, once on the verge of collapse, to unexpectedly become a model for social responsibility in the international airline industry. 6 months after the scandal, Skylux decided to invite independent auditing organizations to reassess their entire operations, corporate culture, and customer service quality. The audit results were a powerful boost, confirming that Skylux Airlines had now completely eliminated discriminatory behaviors and biases. The report was widely published and received great praise from the media and the public. Skylux Airlines officially declared, "the airline for everyone," with no more discrimination in service, which had once been a major stain on the airline's history. Not only that, but Skylux Airlines' story of reform became a special source of inspiration for the entire global aviation industry. A number of airlines, large and small, around the world, began to follow the reform model that Skylux had successfully applied. An international seminar on social responsibility in the airline industry, with speeches from Marcus Richardson and CEO Richard Williams, became an event that attracted thousands of leaders and senior managers from some of the most renowned airlines in the world. At this seminar, Richard Williams stood on stage, confident yet humble, clearly explaining the painful lessons Skylux Airlines had gone through and how they had risen from their worst mistakes. "We made some big mistakes, but it was those very mistakes that helped us realize that ethics, fairness, and humanity are the most important foundations in business. We understand that change is not just about saving face, but about creating a sustainable and better future for everyone." Marcus Richardson, who had fiercely opposed Skylux Airlines when the scandal first broke, was also present at the seminar. This time, he stood alongside Richard Williams as a companion, rather than an adversary, speaking with a voice full of conviction. "What matters is not how badly we made mistakes, but what we learned from them." Skylux Airlines today is the clearest proof of the real change that all of us have been waiting for. I hope Skylux's reform will inspire the entire aviation industry so that no one has to endure injustice again. The collaboration and forgiveness between Marcus and Skylux Airlines became a powerful message that moved the world. The public began to view Skylux Airlines with newfound sympathy, and the number of new customers and strategic partners grew rapidly. Not only regular passengers, but even human rights organizations and social activists who had strongly condemned the scandal now recognized that Skylux Airlines had truly changed. Many major newspapers called this event a miraculous rebirth, as it clearly showed that real correction and change can be achieved if an organization has the courage and determination to do so. At the Skylux Airlines CEO office, Richard Williams looked out the large window at the bustling crowd at the airport check-in counters, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. He knew the road ahead was still long, but the most important thing, the trust of the public, had begun to return to Skylux Airlines. At that same moment, Marcus Richardson sat in his office at Right Tech Solutions, quietly smiling as he read the positive reports about the Skylux Airlines. He felt satisfied knowing that his struggle not only helped his son get justice, but also created a great change for society as a whole. Marcus also did not forget the 3 individuals who had caused significant harm: Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds. He knew they were also slowly reintegrating into society with a completely different mindset. Trevor had started teaching ethics courses in customer service at a vocational training school. Jessica was actively working in a non-profit organization fighting against racial discrimination. Reynolds had become an ethics and responsibility mentor for young pilots at Skylux Airlines. Marcus understood that every person deserved a chance to start over, as long as they truly changed and committed to never repeating their past mistakes. And for Skylux Airlines, that process of rebirth was not just a story of an incredible business recovery, but also a powerful testament to the strength of change, courage, and the value of sincere forgiveness. As Skylux Airlines gradually regained its reputation and became a powerful symbol of positive change, Jordan Richardson had matured far beyond his years after the turbulent event. 6 months had passed, not only helping Skylux Airlines revive, but also giving Jordan a deeper understanding of the true meaning of justice and forgiveness. On a warm spring day, Jordan stepped onto the stage at a national human rights event, under the watchful eyes of thousands of people, including the media, social activists, and especially young leaders from across the country. He stood there, confident and composed, a stark contrast to the young student who had once left that flight in pain and despair. "Hello, everyone," Jordan began with a calm yet clear voice. "My name is Jordan Richardson. Many of you here may know me from a story I never thought I'd be the main character in. A story of injustice and bias, but also a story of the power of change and forgiveness." Jordan paused for a moment, his deep gaze scanning the audience before continuing with heartfelt emotion. "When I was asked to leave my seat on a Skylux Airlines flight simply because of my skin color, I felt truly helpless and hurt. But today, I am not here to talk about that pain anymore. Instead, I want to share what I've learned, what my father, Marcus Richardson, has taught me over these past few months." The audience fell into silence as he continued. "My father has always said that true justice is not simply about punishing those who are wrong. It's much bigger than that. True justice is when those who make mistakes recognize the consequences of their actions and sincerely seek to make amends. It was through this that I learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting the wrongs, but about giving others a chance to right their wrongs." Jordan paused again, his gaze inadvertently meeting the eyes of three familiar faces sitting in the audience: Trevor, Jessica, and Captain Reynolds. They all sat in silence, their faces reflecting deep respect but also shame and regret. Jordan gave a gentle nod in their direction, a simple gesture but one filled with meaning, showing that he had truly forgiven them. Jordan's voice deepened as he continued. "I choose to forgive those who have hurt me, not because I want to forget what happened, but because I believe that only forgiveness can truly allow them to change. And the most important part of forgiveness is that it allows me to move forward without carrying the burden of resentment or hatred." The applause erupted loudly throughout the hall. Many people were moved to tears by the maturity and depth of the young boy's words. Jordan smiled gently at the support, then turned his eyes toward his father, Marcus Richardson, who had stood by him throughout this journey. Marcus stood up and walked over to Jordan, placing a hand softly on his son's shoulder. His voice rang out strong and firm. "I used to think that justice meant severely punishing those who cause injustice. But through what's happened, I've realized that punishment alone is not enough. True justice must also include education and change. Only that can help our society move forward." Marcus looked around the hall, his eyes filled with determination and belief. Skylux Airlines made a grave mistake, but instead of disappearing in collapse, they chose the much harder path, that of making a deep change, correcting their mistakes, and proving to all of us that anyone can learn and grow. Today, Skylux is not just an airline rebounding in business, but has become a powerful symbol of the ability to correct mistakes within our society. Marcus glanced at Richard Williams, the CEO of Skylux Airlines, who sat in the audience, deeply moved. Williams nodded slightly at Marcus, a silent confirmation of the difficult journey they had both overcome together. Jordan concluded his speech with words full of emotion but strong resolve. "I hope my story will be a lesson to everyone. True justice can only be achieved when we are not afraid to face our mistakes, bravely fix them, and most importantly, be ready to forgive. Not to forget the wrongs, but to build a better future." The talk ended with a long round of applause, reverberating emotionally through the hall. Afterwards, many people approached Jordan, Marcus, and even the people who had caused harm, like Trevor, Jessica, and Reynolds, expressing their admiration and support for their sincerity, courage, and incredible ability to change. Leaving the event, Jordan felt lighter than ever. He understood that justice wasn't just about punishing mistakes. It was a difficult but necessary process to educate and help people realize that they can always become a better version of themselves. And for Jordan, this was truly the most important lesson he had learned from this extraordinary journey. A lesson about justice, forgiveness, and the endless power of change. The story of Jordan Richardson and Skylux Airlines taught us a profound lesson about the true meaning of justice, forgiveness, and the power of change. Sometimes mistakes are not the end point, but rather the beginning for each person to realize their true value and move towards a better future. What about you? If you were Jordan, would you be ready to forgive those who hurt you? Leave a comment below to share your thoughts. And don't forget to like, share this video to spread this meaningful message, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about life and human values. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next stories.